Hello and welcome to another program with Pastor Frank Lewis, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the cost of not feeling. And you might be saying, well, wait a minute, I have feelings. Well, here's the thing. I have groups that I do every week. I have been a pastor for 12 years, have my own church, and over the last 15, 16 years, I have found that most people have limited feelings. They have less feelings than they need to have great relationships. And most importantly, there are some that have actually numbed their feelings, shut them down, and they don't feel anything. I was actually like that at one time because of what I went through with my father. What causes it is a gradual situation where it's a reaction of self-preservation to when there's too much trauma and too many things that are happening in the family that are painful. So we're going to dig into that today. You please realize that everybody has limited feelings. Everybody is in their head in a way that is not going to build good relationships, help them raise emotionally healthy children. So this applies to you, and it applies to everybody because we've all been through trauma and we've all our parents have fallen short of the glory of God. So we're going to dig into this subject today, and we're going to look at the cost of not feeling, the cost of numbing our feelings. And there is a cost, and it's a cost not only paid by you, the person that had limited feelings, but it's also paid by your children. And it also affects your relationship with God. So it affects you and your children and your relationship with God. So it really isn't like abuse. It's really not like constant family conflicts. What it is subtle. And what happens is that slowly, through disappointments and trauma and being overwhelmed by different situations in the family or in the house, that a child actually ends up dampening down their feelings because feelings are not accepted by their parents. So they dampen down feelings, and then as a person who has dampened down feelings has more and more trauma, they'll tighten that feeling. Their heart will become hard in the sense that they won't be able to feel. They won't be able to have emotions. They won't be able to have empathy. And so it's a problem. And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. But one day people realize that they don't feel. They don't feel like they're supposed to feel. They don't feel joy. They don't feel compassion. And they just are not able to walk in anybody else's shoes with compassion. And what makes emotional disconnection or not feeling so dangerous is that it doesn't just affect you. It affects the way that you believe. It affects how you relate to yourself. It affects, emotional disconnection will affect your identity. It'll affect who you think you are. Some people, I've had people ask me over the years, some people say, well, I'm just like that. I'm just shy. No, you're shut down. You had to do that in order to be able to cope. And so that was one of the things that your brain decided, okay, I just need to shut down. And so it really affects all relationships, and it really causes the heart to not feel, and what we call a not feeling heart is a hardened heart. And God talks about that in the Bible. And so it really turns loving homes into emotionally barren spaces. And that's not what we want. That's why I'm doing this whole book on parents, called the Parents Playbook, is so that we can have this. The truth is that the cost of emotional disconnection is far greater than most people realize. And we're going to get into that. And I'm going to be digging deeper into that. But first of all, I want you to know about my book. And this is the book that I wrote. It's called The Key. And you can get it on Amazon. It is the key to emotional healing. And it's a key that will help you to become emotionally healed. It'll first of all tell you what the problem is, and then help you to know how to solve the problem. I also have on YouTube, a YouTube channel. It's called @ Fortifying Families 4, Fortifying Families 4. And I have about, I think there's 12 to 13, maybe even 14 videos on how to parent and raise emotionally healthy kids, and also a 22 videos on how to have a great marriage. And so we're going to dig deeper now, though, and emotional disconnection starts off as survival, but it becomes sabotage. And the reason it becomes sabotage is because the person is actually sabotaging themselves. Not feeling is a sabotage to your identity and to who God made you to be. So it's very, very important that we recognize there's no fault. You don't have to blame yourself. But what's happened is that life was too unpredictable. Feelings were, the atmosphere was too charged with emotion, and so it just shut feelings down. Your mind told your body to shut the feelings down, your nervous system, and so you didn't end up feeling. And so if you're a child that had unpredictable parents, that's likely to happen. If you're a spouse who's criticized all the time, you're likely to shut down your feelings because they're dangerous. Why? Because they get more criticism. An adult could be overwhelmed by stress, trauma, burnout, and they shut down because of that. It really seems protective, like I said, but it's really dangerous because what it does is it just disconnects not only your feelings, but it disconnects relationships. You can't raise emotionally healthy kids if you're shut down. And so that's not going to work well. And so the truth is you can't numb pain without also numbing joy. You can't have joy if you're going to not feel. You can't have no feelings and then have anger without disconnecting from love. In other words, if you disconnect from anger because you're afraid of it, you'll disconnect from love. If you disconnect from fear, you'll also disconnect from hope. So it's very dangerous and something that we really need to look into and really understand that the real problem is never selective. It silences. See, shutting down silences the entire spectrum of human emotions. And that's not what you want, because God created us to have relationships, and in those relationships, He created us with emotion. It creates a cycle of misunderstanding to be emotionally disconnected. And, some people think that emotional disconnection is a good thing because they're calm and they seem to have it, life in an okay fashion. But they really people that are disconnected feel unseen, they feel alone, they feel overwhelmed, they feel afraid of vulnerability, they can't tell anybody who they really are, and they're unsure about how to connect, how to reconnect. How do they get back these feelings that they've lost? And here's the problem. Spouses and children feel rejected by the shut down father or mother. That's what a child feels. That's what a spouse feels. Unimportant, shut out, confused, desperate for closeness, and burdened with emotional problems. So emotional disconnection creates a cycle that causes unhealthy marriage, causes unhealthy children to be raised by a person that's a spouse that's emotionally disconnected. And so it really becomes because the adult can't open up, and because they shut others out of the family, they shut people out of their lives. I have a person in one of my groups that just says, I shut everybody out of my life. And my life is not very, it's not very wonderful because of that. And so what happens is those people that are shut out, they don't trust, they don't have intimacy, and they don't have connection. So it's the very foundation of emotionally healthy relationships is to be able to feel. And you've got to feel in order to heal. It's one of the reasons I'm going into this, because we've got to be able to feel in order to heal. And so it really affects your identity. See, to be emotionally disconnected, a person shuts down, they lose touch with who they truly are. They can't grasp who they truly are. Emotions and feelings tell us, whether we're on the right track or whether we're on the wrong track. It's like putting a dipstick into the car and you read and see how much oil you have in. Well, you tell, am I moving towards pleasure or am I moving towards pain? That's what feelings does. So the people that don't feel lost, conflicted. They feel empty. I've had a number of people tell me I'm empty and purposeless. They just don't feel like they have a purpose. They feel unmotivated, and they feel like a stranger to themselves. That's one that is really sad. And so feelings and emotion were given to us by God to help us understand our desires, our values, our boundaries, our convictions, and our passions. The person who's shut down doesn't have a lot of passion, and so they become directionless. They don't have a good direction. They can't make decisions clearly and confidently. And so they settle into life's routines, but have no joy. See, joy in relationships, brain scientists tell us that joy is what happens when someone's glad to be with us in every situation that we find ourselves in. So they have no joy because they can't have good relationships. And so it leads to unhealthy coping mechanisms. Being emotionally disconnected leads to unhealthy coping mechanisms. What does that mean? Well, they in order to get away from emotional pain and disconnectedness, not feeling, numbing feelings always comes from emotional pain. So they become a workaholic. They overeat. They get into pornography or self-soothing. They entertain themselves with entertainment overload. They like so many of the Gen Zs and younger generation, they get into a lot of video games, alcohol, or substance abuse, and they have emotional affairs on the internet. They shop too much, spend too much. They have anger and withdrawal, and they're needing to be in control as a perfectionist. That's some of the symptoms. That's some of how they ended up coping. And the coping mechanisms, they don't get pleasure from them. They are just simply an escape. They're simply a way to lessen the emotional pain that they've been feeling. So they end up with a hardened heart. Like I said, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to get that heart less hard. They end up causing their children to have emotional hardship. Their children are not going to be healthy emotionally. When a parent becomes emotionally shut down, the child experiences it as rejection. Why am I not good enough that mom or dad will not pay attention to me? And so they, they end up saying something's wrong with me. The child ends up with something wrong with them. My feelings are too much for mom. I'm not important. If I was more important, if I was more valuable to my shutdown mom or dad, then they'd pay attention to me. Well, they don't know that they're shut down. A child doesn't know that. And so they don't know why they're not being accepted, approved, and loved. But the reason is because mom or dad shut down. And that's what happens to the children. So they have to earn love by performing and being good enough. But they are never good enough because they can't do enough to get mom or dad to connect with them. And so they're really in trouble. And children raised by an emotionally disconnected parent, they grow up with anxiety. They grow up with an insecure attachment. That means they don't have good relationship with mom or dad. They're hyper independent, many times because they didn't get what they needed in relationship. They become super independent to avoid the pain. They're chronically lonely, they're emotionally confused, and they have difficulty giving and receiving love. That's what happens to children. And they have a difficult time expressing themselves. Because if mom and dad didn't have a relationship, how did they learn to express themselves? They learn to please others, and they have a hard time taking care of themselves because they don't believe they're good enough. So they learn to adopt instead of connect. They don't connect easily. Children of emotionally shut down father or mother don't connect easily. And they learn to silence their feelings, to keep peace, and avoid conflict. They don't have good boundaries, and they don't know how to confront, to protect themselves. So they don't have good boundaries, they don't know how to confront. Being raised by a parent or parents that are emotionally disconnected causes their children to have emotional wounds. I talked about that in prior sessions, and emotional wounds will cause a child to grow up as an adult with emotional wounds. Then they raise their kids, cause them emotional wounds, and the whole thing keeps going, and the dysfunctional cycle continues, and that's why I'm doing this. That's the whole reason I'm doing this, is to stop the madness. And so it weakens faith. Do you know that if you can't have an emotional connection with your wife or your husband or your child, you can't have an emotional connection with God? And so they've learned to numb their feelings because they can't have a real relationship with God. Well, if you've numbed your feelings, you're not going to be able to feel God. And they're going to be, if their father, especially their father, was emotionally disconnected, they're going to have a really hard time with God the Father. It's a real hard time trusting and a real hard time believing that He's for them, believing that He cares about them. And so the parent who numbed their feelings can't have a relationship with their spouse, their children, and God. So they struggle. This parent struggles to feel God's presence. They can't receive God's love. They have a very difficult time trusting God. How can you trust God if you can't relate to Him? And they don't pray with openness and honesty. They can't worship with authenticity. They can't experience conviction. And they can't really be led or get comfort from the Word of God that they may be reading because they're in their head. See, when you end up shutting down your emotions, you go to the head. Your head is the one that's leading, not feelings. And so you're not going to have a great relationship with God. And so the walls that are erected for protection from feeling emotional pain not only keep people out, they keep God out. And because they can't have a real relationship with God, their lives become less fulfilling. And they become dry, dutiful, routine, distant, confusing, and hollow. That's what happens to people that don't have a relationship with anybody. That's what happens to them. And so an emotionally disconnected people know the truth but can't feel it. They know the truth but can't feel it. They believe in God, but they struggle to receive His love, His compassion, His understanding. They struggle to believe that God is for them because they have never experienced relationship with others. They read the Bible, but they feel disconnected from the words of the Bible and from the promises of the Bible. How can you believe in the promises of the Bible if you cannot believe the author of the Bible and believe God? You're just not going to be able to have a great relationship. See, God speaks to a person's heart. As man thinks, so is he. So, the heart is the key to the whole thing. It's not as a man thinks in his head, it's the man thinks in his heart. And so, if you have a guarded heart, and you're really not going to be able to hear very much from God. You're not likely to hear very much from God. Emotional disconnection causes spiritual dehydration. In other words, the Bible says that if you read the Word, you're watered by the Word. You get fed by the Word. Well, there's not going to be much feeding, and there certainly is going to be lack of watering because you have not the ability to feel the passion of the Bible, the hope of the Bible, the correction of the Bible. So numb people keep functioning, but they are running on empty. They haven't got any fuel in the tank. They're running on empty. And when you run on empty, you end up not being able to do much. That's why their lives are purposeless. That's why their lives are directionless. They just don't have clarity of thought, and they don't have a real understanding of destiny because they're so shut down. So it's a tremendous cost for not feeling. It's a tremendous cost for numbing your feelings. And the cost is not only borne by you, it affects your spouse, as I said, your children, and your relationship with God. So being emotionally shut down and building walls so you can be protected from emotional pain also, very importantly, affects your relationship with God. And how can you have a relationship? You can't have a relationship with your wife, as I said, or your husband, or your children. How are you going to have a relationship with God? And that's the most satisfying of all relationships. So I've really dug into what the cost is of emotional disconnection and numbing your feelings for your spouse and your children and for your relationship with God for one reason. I want you to decide to change. I want you to decide, you know what? I need to feel more. I need to be able to identify my feelings. I need to be able to feel again. For some of you, it's literally feeling again. And so I'm working with an 80-year-old man right now who for his whole life has been numb. For his whole life, he's been emotionally disconnected. And he just really doesn't have quality of life. He told me that he feels like his life has been wasted. His wife divorced him, and his two kids were very, very affected. He doesn't even have a relationship with his kids now, which is very, very sad. He feels very distant, and he doesn't have a fulfilling relationship with God. So that's what happens when a person hasn't done anything about it. He's doing something about it now, and in the next week, I'm going to share with you how you can feel again, and I'll tell you about his story because he is actually starting to have significant results. I've told him he can feel again, and if you will commit to do the work that must be done, you can feel again. If he can feel again, you can feel again. You can be healed enough to let yourself feel the emotions that you've never felt. If my 80-year-old friend can do it, you can do it. Absolutely true. And next week, I'm going to share with you some things you can do to be emotionally healed. How can you feel again? What's the process? What are the steps? I'm going to get into that next week. And when you make a serious commitment, got to make a commitment here to get emotionally healed. That's why I wrote the book. Remember, I told you, this is why I wrote the book. God showed my wife and myself, my wife who was in heaven now, showed us years ago when we had the church how to get emotionally healed. And we took all that we learned. I've been studying brain science for 20 years. It has been extremely important what brain scientists, because they tell us how God designed our brains. And it's because of that that I was able to write this book. And you can get it on Amazon, like I said. But you need to have a way to know how to get emotionally healed. And so what's going to happen when you get more emotional healing? You're going to be able to feel again. You're going to be able to have a really good relationship with your spouse, and you're going to be able to raise emotionally healthy children. But you know what's most important? You're going to actually end up with a relationship with God. And isn't that what you want? Isn't that what we all want? To have this incredible relationship with God? Well, you can have that. All you have to do is make a commitment. A commitment to do what? A commitment to feel again, to get emotionally healed, and you're going to have then what you've always been looking for. You don't want to be feeling alone. You want to feel disconnected. You don't want to feel like you're in a wasteland of relationship problems. You want to have good relationships so you can feel joy, so you can feel excitement, so you can feel the things that are so important in love, and you can feel fear, you can feel pain again, because that's how you get to love. And so I want to tell you that this is the key. And if you'll do this, you will now recognize that you're not feeling, but you can feel again, and it'll be worth your while.